with new regulation. But that was when the conservatives were in charge. So when we're getting rid of Dodd-Frank, we get rid of Sarbanes-Oxley as well. I am convinced that we're living at a time that an era is ending. And this is significant because you can be depressed at times when you look at what's happened in Washington. You work hard, you come close to victories, you don't have real victories, and it goes on and on. You say, this is too overwhelming. And Washington is responding too slowly. But the end of an era provides an opportunity. And I'm thinking recently about what era are we talking about? And I would say, first off, in the last 100 years approximately, what about 1913? That was a beginning of an era. That was a beginning of a time where they said, you know, with the income tax and a new foreign policy, we're going to make the world safe for democracy, and we're going to have a war to end all wars, and we're going to have a Federal Reserve that's going to get rid of the business cycle, on and on. We were going to introduce this wonderful era. Well, guess what? That era is not with us anymore. It's over and done with. We're just looking at the last vestiges of a bad program started in 1913. We will eventually get rid of the Federal Reserve. End it. Good idea. Also at approximately that same time, something else was started, and that was the domination or the oncoming of communism, 1917. The Bolsheviks taking over, and communism was a panacea. It was all done with good intentions. You take care of the people, all those wonderful promises. Well, communism lasted 74 years. It dissipated between 1989 and 1991. People don't talk too much about communism anymore. At the same time, communism brought about is hard to count when it gets up into the hundreds of millions. It is estimated that possibly 200 million people died by people who were able to put bad ideas out on the table and look at the tragedy of what happened. That era is over and done with. We are not going to see the world go back to that type of a program again. One of the books that impressed me when I was still in medical school was Dr. Zhivago. And I remember one line in there when Laura was talking to Zhivago, and things were very, very bad during the revolution. And she says to Zhivago, "What a terrible time to be alive." And she was absolutely right, anticipating just what was coming. But I think things are different now. I don't think we should be as depressed. We have more knowledge now than ever before. We also had the 1930s, a continuation of the progressive era. We had the Keynesian economic policies take over, the New Deal policies taken over, the fascism of Hitler and Mussolini. And they contributed to another 25 million people that died, just the fascism of Europe. So the 1930s didn't do as well either. And then that, of course, when you have bad economic policy, when you get involved in a war to end wars, it's only a war to begin more wars, and you end up in another world war. We end up, again, another World War II, and then after World War II, we have this internationalism come in. We have the development of the United Nations and the IMF and the World Bank. But they set up, of course, they were working toward worldwide currency, so they set up this Bretton Woods agreement on money, which was a total farce. The good economists, the Austrian economists at that time said, it can't work, it won't work. And indeed, when it fell apart, it was a very, very impressive day for me, because like it is tonight, a Sunday evening, it was on a Sunday evening, August 15th, 1971, the Bretton Woods monetary system collapsed. But that was predictable, and that's over with. And there are some, there's no doubt, would like to go back to that. But it also gives us the wonderful opportunity to advance forward. In more recent history, we have had the advancement of these failed policy. The Project for a New American Century. That is you already know there are a bunch of neocons running that show. They actually opened up an office in 1997. They closed their office in 2006. That doesn't mean they're gone, and that doesn't mean they're not influencing most of the politicians in Washington, but believe me, they're losing steam. Right now, the wars that have been fought in these 10 last years has given us $4 trillion worth of debt, are unpopular, we can't afford them, the American people want us out, and they want to bring the troops home. If they don't listen to your shouts, and if they don't listen to common sense, they're going to listen to the facts of life. And the facts of life is we can't afford it anymore. The Soviets didn't leave because they had an enlightenment. They left because they were broke. And they so foolishly got bogged down in Afghanistan. So why don't we wise up and just take care of ourselves and defend our country and not be the policemen of the world? These conditions that have been developing for the past 100 years, and now we're in the midst of a change, providing an opportunity for a revolution towards liberty. This has provided some very serious problems for us. It will not be smooth sailing, but there's reason to be optimistic that we can have great achievement. But to me, the three problems that we have to face, number one, that I see as the problem, that if we solved it, it probably would solve most of the other ones. And that is the attack on personal liberty. If people truly understood what personal liberty means, that you have self-ownership, that you have a natural God-given right to your life, therefore you have a right to your liberty, and we defend all life and all liberty regardless of our judgment about how people are using that liberty, then we would have the natural sequence of saying, if that is the case, you have a natural right to keep the fruits of your labor, and all of it. Personal liberty, when it returns, once again, you'll be able to drink raw milk. You'll be able to make rope out of hemp. You will be able to feel secure in your houses, that the federal government will not be able to spy on you or bust into your house without a search warrant. You will be allowed, without a government permit, to buy nutritional products when you please and what you please. No longer will government assume they have the responsibility of protecting you against yourself. Nobody can do that. The emphasis will no longer be on economic and personal security. The government will take care of us, but it will be emphasizing the government is there to protect our liberty. They can give us security, whether it's economic, which always fails, or whether it's personal security. But you will become, if the government said we can provide you perfect security, isn't that what we do with animals that we breed to raise up and eat? I mean, this is what happens. They're secure. You put them in cages or you put them in fields, you fatten them up, you take care of them. They have all the food they want and the best nutrition until it's time to butcher. And this is safe. So what you want is liberty. You don't want this false sense of security that governments cannot give you. Now, it is true in a free society you can pick your nutritional products and you can make your own choices and you can drink raw milk. But you also, in a free society, you're allowed to make even more controversial choices. You might even decide to drink alcohol. And there's a little bit of risk in alcohol, but in a truly free society, they tried that alcohol business one time. It didn't work very well. Too many politicians drank alcohol, so they finally repealed that. But yes, you would be allowed to make a decision on what kind of, what things you smoke and drink or eat or whatever you do to your own body. Now, of course, the argument is what would happen to the world if they had freedom of choice to imbibe drugs and all these dangerous things? Well, why don't you go back and look at early American history up until about 1938 and find out how many people were using these drugs in the 19th century. So once again, it's who gets to make these decisions. But the hardest thing for some people to accept, both liberals and conservatives, on this issue of tolerance of your freedom. Yes, we want you to have your freedom. We want you to make your own choices, and we're not going to tell you that you can't make bad choices. People say, well, doesn't that mean you endorse it? What if people drink too much or smoke too much into making their own choices? Well, there's one rule. They have to assume the consequences of their actions totally and completely. But it is under the pretense of taking care of ourselves that we have this drug war. Our government agencies have been known to be involved in drug trades. Government agents have been involved. The law enforcement agencies have been involved. And guess what? Guess which industry would like to see marijuana never legalized? That's the alcohol industry. How about the drug companies that sell all these tranquilizers? They don't want marijuana legalized either. So there's a lot of special interests that would like to keep drugs illegal. But the attack then is on our liberties. That is the important thing. We want our freedoms to make these decisions with new regulation. But that was when the conservatives were in charge. So when we're getting rid of Dodd-Frank, we get rid of Sarbanes-Oxley as well. I am convinced that we're living at a time that an era is ending. And this is significant because you can be depressed at times when you look at what's happened in Washington. You work hard, you come close to victories, you don't have real victories, and it goes on and on. He said, this is too overwhelming. And Washington is responding too slowly. But the end of an era provides an opportunity. And I'm thinking recently about what era are we talking about? And I would say, first off, in the last 100 years approximately, what about 1913? That was a beginning of an era. That was a beginning of a time where they said, with the income tax and a new foreign policy, we're going to make the world safe for democracy, and we're going to have a war to end all wars, and we're going to have a Federal Reserve that's going to get rid of the business cycle, on and on. We were going to introduce this wonderful era. Well, guess what? That era is not with us anymore. It's over and done with. We're just looking at